Hello and welcome to the 2 Minute Drill preseason podcast. I'm Michael Rochman, that's Jack Donovan, and today we are previewing the quarterback position. Look, there's a lot of preseason hype going around, and especially in the preseason, it's a lot easier to be optimistic. But before we get diving into anyone, Jack, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Really excited to kind of get things kicked off again on the channel. Obviously, last year, whenever we finished the draft content, we kind of went AWOL for a little bit, missing in action. But now, this time around, we're trying to get the podcast going through the season so that they can continuously connect with us and see some of our thoughts as the year progresses. And right now, no better position to talk about than quarterback. So let's talk first about the idea and just premise of our sort of evaluation right now, because it is the preseason. So while a lot of these guys are based on last year's play, this upcoming season is going to determine ultimately where they end up in the draft and how they're valued as a prospect. But also, it's easier to kind of have more optimism about these guys heading into a year where they have those chances to take those steps. So, why don't you share your thought process a little bit when it came to the evaluation of these passers?
Yeah, I think overall from both of us, you'll probably see some pretty generous evaluations, just kind of taking into account the fact that you just have another year of football to go until they really go through the process with like the Senior Bowl and the Combine and things like that. So I think it's just kind of getting a good idea of who these guys are, but not just that, what they can kind of develop into over the next year, because that's really what's going to be sort of the determinant of their stock rather than, what they are a year out.
Yeah, a lot of benefit of the doubt when it comes to these guys. And for that reason, maybe someone who is a little bit more toolsy will get more propped up and ultimately just fall all the way down the ranks by the time we are actually discussing the draft. So without further ado, let's dive in and we'll go in alphabetical order here. So let's start off with Jalen Milroe. Jack, I want to hear your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I mean, you watch his tape and it's very clear to see why he's getting some of the praise he's gotten throughout this offseason, started looking towards next year. He's just an incredible athlete, does so much on the ground with his legs, has a great arm, can throw it all over the field, had the highest big time throw percentage in the country last year. So, he was creating these big time plays at such a high rate. And doing it on an Alabama team that was very good, but it's not the Bama we're used to. He wasn't throwing to 3 first-round wide receivers out there. So it was some very impressive stuff, but at the same time, there's a lot that needs to get better here. He got benched during the year, and it was with good reason. He wasn't playing well at the beginning of the year. He did a really good job of bouncing back, which I thought was great to see. I think the big thing for me that I'm really concerned about is he takes a lot of sacks, and that really needs to get a lot better for him to be a serious prospect. But if he can do that, then I think he could go, first round without much of a question.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see how he does in this offense with Kalen DeBauer now at Alabama. I think it's a really good fit for him because when you watch Jalen Milroe, he's very mobile. Obviously, the athleticism jumps off the tape, especially at 6'2", 220 pounds. That type of stuff stands out, and it makes him an elite athlete out of the backfield, but someone who's also operating as the guy under center rather than some of the other athletes we see where maybe they're at running back, fullback, or whatever it is. This is someone that can legitimately take 10, 15 carries a game while still providing as a quarterback. The deep ball is actually very impressive. He's got some nice touch when it comes to throwing downfield and making those splash plays, but the short to intermediate game is what's going to need to make those next steps. But in that DeBauer offense, we have seen the deep game really kind of be the staple of that offense, to where those big splash plays are what is going to get the offense start to really kind of produce over the course of a game. And if Milroe can make those steps to where he's showing better touch, showing better processing, then there is a lot of promise. And, in the spring game, I checked it out for a little bit just to see some of the improvements. And, if we've noticed any strides in his play, there's still a lot of offseason left after that moment in time. But I saw some really nice throws out of him that inspire optimism out of me. I'm not necessarily buying in all the way on thinking this is going to be the future first pick of the draft or even a first rounder just yet. But if he is able to show that he is a consistent passer with the athleticism and upside that he offers, there is real potential that this is a first rounder by the time we're talking about the draft come April.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's the big thing is the DeBoer offense with his deep ball ability. We saw it last year. Michael Penix was so efficient throwing the ball downfield to like Rome Odunze. And I think Milroe's in a similar spot where he's going to have an offense that really plays around his strengths, and it'll be cool to see that, I think, and could do a lot for his stock.
Yeah, so moving on from Alabama. Now we're going to Arkansas. It's another toolsy quarterback. I mean, Taylen Green is one of the more exciting players that you're going to see in the SEC this year, but there are a lot of question marks. Jack, share your initial thoughts on Green and what you saw from him coming from Boise State now to be the Razorbacks quarterback in 2024.
Yeah, like you said, super toolsy. He's another great athlete, another great arm. He's not quite as far along as a passer as Milroe, I didn't think. The accuracy's kind of all over the place. He's not really a guy who takes care of the ball very well right now. And like Milroe, he did get benched last year, and then they kind of had this weird dual quarterback system for a chunk of the year, and then the other guy got hurt, and he came back in as a starter. And now he's making this huge jump up from the Mountain West to the SEC. So, there needs to be a lot of strides for me to see him as a guy next year, I think. The appeal is very clear, but he's got a ways to go. And I think he's another year after next year. So I would not be surprised if he's a guy that we're talking about in 2026 rather than 2025.
Yeah, Green was someone that I wasn't sure what to expect when I turned on the tape, just because, I've heard about him at Boise State, and I saw some watching games casually. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't sure how much I saw from him as a prospect. But when I came into his tape with a sort of scouting lens in that regard, I was very impressed with some of the flashes that he has. He has a really nice long frame that both benefits him as a rushing threat and as a passer. He makes some really nice tosses downfield. He has some great velocity on his throws. The mechanics need cleaned up. The processing is still an issue. I think there's going to be that kind of question mark of, this is someone that, like you said, was kind of battling for his play time at Boise State, and he eventually won that job. But on paper, you wouldn't really expect a guy who has been benched at the MWC level to kind of make that jump up to the SEC. I really like the situation that he's coming into. I mean, Arkansas as a whole is sort of in a situation where everyone is battling for their lives right now. They brought in a lot of transfer portal guys. Sam Pittman is someone that needs to have a good year to keep his job. Bobby Petrino being brought in as offensive coordinator is really exciting, and it's something that could really benefit the play of Green. It's a question mark. I do think there's a lot of risk and a lot of reward in an acquisition like this. I think he's someone that's exciting. He has one more year of eligibility after this season, so I do think that this is someone that we're probably going to be talking about as a 2026 guy. But I mean, there are a lot of boxes that he checks that if he can kind of put it together on the field of play and make it happen where he's consistently producing at a high level, I mean, this is someone that could be easily in that conversation for the top pick of the draft, just based on tools alone. Now, that's easier said than done. That's not going to happen for every toolsy prospect out there, but this is someone that kind of fits into that mold where maybe right now in the summer, it's a lot easier to say, man, this guy has a lot of great traits. I'm all in, but we need to see it over the course of the season where he's throwing 60 to 68% as a completion percentage, and he's throwing for nice downfield throws and making some great passes in complicated defenses. Going from the Mountain West to the SEC, it's going to be difficult, but he also has to become more efficient, which is going to be a tough task. But hey, there are definitely traits for him to make it happen.
Yep, absolutely.
So moving on from Taylen Green, we're going from Arkansas to Auburn. Payton Thorne, a 6-year senior that, personally, I hate to say it because, again, this is summer where we're supposed to have this rose-tinted glasses on a lot of these guys. But Payton Thorne, for me, was one of my few UDFA grades in this SEC quarterback class. And obviously, not every quarterback in this SEC conference is going to end up drafted when they eventually enter for the NFL. But there's a little bit more to buy into with each quarterback that I just didn't see with Thorne. I mean, he's a nice athlete. There is some velocity on his passes in the short to intermediate game, but I didn't think he was accurate enough in all three levels of the field. I didn't think that he had the arm strength downfield to be a consistent threat in that regard. And I didn't think his athleticism was enough to where I'm saying, he's got the ability to buy time with his legs and become a running threat, to where maybe he can be a nice backup, change of pace type guy that can offer some value in that second unit for an offense. So we haven't seen it with Thorne. I mean, that's the big thing that's been a gripe about him since Michigan State. And now here at Auburn, I was kind of expecting the Tigers to be active in the portal, maybe go for like Caden Salter or something like that, but it never really happened. Now, Thorne's back for another season. That experience is going to be huge for him, but right now, I just don't have a lot of optimism about his NFL prospect.
Yeah, he was my lowest quarterback in this conference too. I think, there's some physical stuff that's interesting. He's a decent athlete. The arm's not terrible, but he just really struggles under pressure. He doesn't, like you said, doesn't have a lot of accuracy really at any level. Um, and we're on year 6 now. It's tough to see, this huge leap happening. Last year, Auburn, not a lot around him in that offense. So you could be a little bit sympathetic there. But, at Michigan State, he's thrown to Jaden Reed and Keon Coleman and still wasn't really lighting on fire. So I'm not super optimistic in him being, much more than like an undrafted guy, free agent, similar thing that you said, because there's just, I don't know, it's tough to see a guy who doesn't really have a defining elite trait taking this huge step in year 6.
Yeah, and I think whenever you look at some of the older quarterbacks who have kind of put it all together in their final season, there was more on paper to buy into. Bo Nix was a guy that we knew about the arm talent, but it was when he kind of refined that, was willing to kind of reel it back a little bit and take advantage of the underneath and short game and quick passing, where he really kind of took that next step. Michael Penix Jr. was really about getting healthy and finding his way onto the field to where he could get that experience and eventually take that next step. Hendon Hooker was a guy that, we kind of saw him really kind of iron out a lot of the deficiencies, but he always had that dual threat ability and that ability to pass downfield with great touch. We don't see that from Thorne. And I think that's the big question mark is, can he be a good quarterback for this Auburn Tigers offense? And I'm kind of curious to know how long his leash is going to be with this team, because we know that they were in on guys like Grayson McCall, so maybe they are going to be quick to turn to maybe a Walker White or something like that, a younger guy in this roster that maybe they're just going to bet on and see if they can kind of shake out the rust that Thorne maybe doesn't have in his near future, just because of what we've seen from the experience in the past. But having that 6th year where you're a 5th-year starter, that is going to pay off and maybe help him produce at the college level. And, there are guys like Sean Clifford where maybe they don't have a lot of the traits and checked boxes as an NFL prospect, but they still end up getting drafted. So sometimes it's just about having a team that likes you for Thorne. And maybe that could be the case. Maybe he puts together a strong year with Hugh Freeze as head coach. But right now, I'm not buying in compared to a lot of the other options available out in college football. But moving forward a little bit, let's talk about Graham Mertz at Florida, another quarterback that comes in with a lot of experience, 5th-year senior, so no eligibility. He's going to be heading for that next level of his career. I like his tape. I thought that there was a lot of impressive moments. He's someone that, the media seemed a lot higher on than a lot of fans, and I was kind of lower on him too. I liked some of the flashes, but I didn't think I'd be as bought in. I turned on the tape. First game was against Kentucky, where he was absolutely struggling, losing his footing, losing his accuracy, looked frantic the entire time. Part of that's because of Deion Walker. Part of that's because of J.J. Weaver, pieces on Kentucky's defense. But then he went against Tennessee, who also has an impressive defense, and he put together some really nice throws, looked very poised in the pocket, and was making some really nice moments happen. I think that Mertz is probably one of the higher floor quarterbacks of the senior hall when it comes to the position. And I think that he's probably one of the safer bets to be drafted because he checks a lot of boxes of just being a pro-ready type of passer. But I do wonder about the ability to kind of make those next steps and what type of upside he has in his 5th year. This is a guy, though, that I think is similar to the Nix and Penix mold, where you were kind of left wanting a little bit more from them, and then eventually they finally put it together. Maybe more Hooker than like a Nix and Penix, where they ended up being first-round guys. But even Hooker, there's talk about him being a potential first-round guy prior to the ACL tear. And, after this past season, now I buy it even more than at the time when he was drafted. But, Mertz is someone that I think has the moments on tape that flashes NFL quarterback to me. It's now about seeing it over the course of an entire season, especially in a year where Florida, similar to Arkansas, if they don't perform, Napier's probably out of a job. So there's a lot of pressure there in Gainesville, and I want to see how Mertz does with it.
Yeah, I wasn't quite as, enthusiastic about Mertz last year. I thought that it was a pretty easy offense. He wasn't really doing a lot downfield, not a lot out of structure, which is fine. Like we just saw Bo Nix and Penix go super early, and they weren't doing too much out of structure either. I think Nix is a pretty good comparison just trajectory-wise. I think, he was a guy who was a little bit too reckless, and then he goes to Oregon, and they play this much more kind of structured offense, and he adapts well. I think Mertz was another guy who was pretty reckless at Wisconsin, and he comes to Florida, and they run a bit of a simpler offense, and he plays better. I wasn't quite there with his arm. I think it's like okay. I do think he's a guy that'll probably be picked earlier than I kind of think like him to be picked. But I agree that he could be sort of a Hendon Hooker type where if he puts together a big final year here, he could definitely see his stock jump a bit. I think it'll be interesting too because Florida plays a super difficult schedule. I think they play a bunch of the top SEC teams. So he'll be going against the best of the best. So if he can put together a good year, then yeah, I think he has a chance to go, in the middle rounds or something around there.
Yeah, and I think one thing that works to his favor with that schedule is that once you've gone against those battle tested teams, especially when you're an experienced quarterback, sometimes that type of momentum can really build on itself and help you kind of establish yourself as a top quarterback in college football. I'm not sure if Mertz is going to reach that; it's going to be tough, but I do like what I've seen in terms of just being able to layer passes, make some of those short to intermediate throws, not just when they're given to him, with space underneath, but when it's a tight window that you have to be making excellent tosses. He seems to come through in that regard pretty consistently to where I'm willing to bet on him to maybe make this leap with that extra experience in his fifth year. But again, if it doesn't happen right now, it's easier to kind of believe in than it is when we're in week 6 and maybe they're 3-3 and Mertz has kind of had inconsistent outings week in, week out. So it'll be interesting to see. But one quarterback that I think is the epitome of consistency, probably the favorite to be the first pick of the draft right now, Carson Beck out of Georgia. Jack, why don't you go first? Share your thoughts on him so far.
Yeah, I mean, he came in last year as a first year starter on a team that's won the last 2 national championships, and they didn't get it done again this year, but I thought he had a really good year. It's not the most difficult situations, with that excellent offensive line and weapons across the board who are, probably guys are going to be playing on Sunday in a few years. But, he did a good job. He was accurate. He has a nice arm. He wasn't turning the ball over too much. He was getting the ball out quick. I thought he had a really nice year. I don't think, he's this crazy high ceiling guy. I think he's not really super mobile. He can move around a little bit, I guess, but he's not going to really be this huge creator out of structure. But he's got a good arm. He can make all the throws. And I feel like with a lot of these sort of offensive gurus that are kind of up and coming, kind of like in the Shanahan mold, they can make that work and they can make it work at a really high level. So I think he's a guy who's going to go early unless he has a terrible year. Um, I don't think his ceiling is going to be the highest in the class. I think there are guys who could probably overtake him. And I wouldn't be super surprised about it, but I think he's just a good prospect, and I think he'll stay that way. There's not too much to be like concerned about. He just doesn't quite have the ceiling as some of the more physically gifted guys.
Yeah, and I wrote down Jared Goff for a comparison. I've heard it a lot, so I don't think this is some unique opinion, but I see a lot of those moments, especially with how he's looked now recently on the Lions. But Goff entering the league had his issues that I don't think Beck really has as much of. I think he kind of shows more of the Lions Goff that we've seen where he's confident in the pocket. He's able to make and stay in the pocket for those throws and let the play progress and deliver some of those tight windows. I do think there's going to be questions about his overall upside as a prospect that may allow for guys to potentially pass him up. Maybe the more athletic traitsy QBs like a Jalen Milroe or Quinn Ewers, if they make those steps, they could pass up a guy like Beck. But at the same time, sometimes you just want the guy that is going to be promising and deliver week in, week out for your system. And like you said, with those Shanahan and McVay offenses, that's especially where you want the quarterback play to be at, where you're counting on dependability and you're counting on yourself to produce optimal play calling in order to set up these passers for success. And then they're just delivering the message, I guess. So I think that's where Beck's appeal is. And that's not necessarily a slight on Beck. I don't think that's used against him. There are excellent quarterbacks out there that kind of fall into that same category. But it does open up the window for some of these other franchises to think, man, Beck is good and he's promising and we know what he can be at the next level. But, we see someone like Daquan Finn, if he just has a fantastic year where he has all these traits and you're saying, yeah, I mean, I love the arm strength and I love the mobility and I want to bet on that and think that I can develop this guy into where I have great offense. He has the great playmaking ability to make it happen if the play breaks down. And together we combine that for success. So it's going to be interesting to see. I wouldn't be surprised if Beck remains the uncontested top QB we've seen in years like 2022, where Kenny Pickett was probably the most consistent quarterback, but there wasn't really a rising prospect that everyone was kind of betting on, where everyone thought this guy's going to just absolutely explode onto the scene and become the top QB. We didn't have that, So, as a result, there was no early pick that year. But if a guy like Beck kind of performs as expected, he's probably going to be a top pick. And I think there's going to be a lot of coaches who would be more than happy with that, especially a team like the Giants, where Dable has proven, if you have a competent QB, I can make it happen. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's the situation there. But what I am interested in with Beck is, as far as just supporting cast and surrounding success, he has one of the easier jobs in college football. So there is valid criticism of how much of that is Beck making that happen for this Bulldogs offense. This is a team that obviously was back-to-back national champions. With Beck, they didn't win it. I'm not saying that that's necessarily on Beck specifically, but there are questions about that. And it's going to be, hey, what can you do that elevates this team? And if you aren't elevating the team, is it worth a high-end draft pick and an expensive draft capital that maybe is better spent elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Also, going back to sort of the Goff comparison, where you look at him on the Lions and he's got this excellent offensive line blocking for him. Maybe teams like the Giants, like you mentioned, where their offensive line isn't so good. It could be by the next offseason, but where their line isn't so good, maybe they're a little bit more concerned about taking a guy like Beck because they're not sure he's going to be able to hang when he doesn't have a lot of time to sit back and kind of read the field.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I still wrote down a first-round pick for him. I mean, he's got a nice frame, 6'4", 220 pounds. He is someone that I think is a little bit more risky as a return potential. Georgia kind of has that Clemson type of vibe going on, where it's like these guys are really bought into the program. And we've seen some high-level names that have been heavily hyped up by the draft media end up returning for another year. If Georgia, let's say, makes it to the playoffs and falls just short of the championship, or makes it all the way to the championship but just, doesn't win it, could Carson Beck potentially be a guy that says, hey, look, I think I'll have my opportunity next year, but I want to run it back again for the Bulldogs, try to win a championship while I'm here as their quarterback. Who knows? QBs tend to declare earlier than most other positions, but it wouldn't surprise me if Georgia's able to pull that off, especially with how much they've succeeded at bringing back talent in the past few seasons. But moving forward, a Georgia quarterback that ended up transferring this past offseason, Brock Vandagriff for Kentucky. He was an intriguing guy. There's very limited snaps. So a lot of it is projection and just overhyping what is garbage time stats. Let's just be honest about what it is. But that's not necessarily to the fault of him. It's just you have to make the most of whatever your opportunity is. Still 6'3", 217 pounds, a guy that will be a fourth-year junior, so he'll have one more year of eligibility after this season if he decides to return. Kentucky kept Stoops as their head coach. They are going to be looking to continue to build off of their success with Devin Leary. What did you see out of Vandagriff, and what are your thoughts on him in terms of an NFL draft lens?
Yeah, I was pretty intrigued. I think his arm's pretty good. He can move around, so there's some physical stuff that you're really excited about. Obviously, there's just not a lot of throws to look at, so you can't get too much of a sense of like how accurate it is. I was a little bit I wasn't quite there with his ball placement yet. I think he needs to be a bit more anticipatory as well with his passing, but he hasn't started any games yet. It's not really a surprise that he's pretty raw as a passer. But he's coming to this Kentucky team. They lost Ray Davis in the running game, but they picked up Chip Trayanum from Ohio State, and they've got two really good receivers in Dane Key and Barryon Brown. So he's going to have a lot to work with around him. So I'm pretty excited to see. I think it's pretty likely he'll stay another year, just because it's not too common for first-year starters to declare, especially if they have eligibility remaining. But I'm very intrigued. I think this is a guy who could definitely rise throughout the year if he can put everything together.
Yeah, he's got some very quick feet, which I think worked well for him as a drop back passer. I wouldn't really say he's like a rushing threat to a full degree. He's more just like quick in his steps and quick in dropping back. And then he has a nice arm. He really lets some cannons out from whenever he's like releasing the football. But getting that precision is going to be important. And again, it's one of those things that when you're playing 1-2 drives a game, it's very easy to kind of come out and be a little bit inaccurate and not have the greatest touch, because it's a lot of nerves at the end where you're saying, okay, I'm ready to get in and get my limited snaps for the week. But, now that he gets a full season to play, how is he going to step into this role? How is he going to deliver in terms of being calm and consistent with his ball placement? A lot of it right now is projection, like we said, because it's just very little snaps in opportunities that didn't mean a lot. However, now that he's stepping into this Kentucky team, he's got some really nice receivers. He's got a running back that he can depend on, but it is going to be a very tough SEC slate where he's going against some very strong defenses. So how does he elevate this team, help make his playmakers succeed? And that's going to be the big question mark for him. We've seen guys like Trubisky have 1 year of starting experience and eventually become a draft prospect. So it's definitely on the table for him. But right now, I think I'm in the same boat with you where I would very strongly expect him to be the quarterback in 2025, where we're talking about him in the future as a starter and not necessarily someone that's going to be entering the draft this year. Moving on to LSU, another first-year starter, but this one is probably one of the more highly coveted backups we've seen in a while. Garrett Nussmeier, the quarterback that has been sitting behind Jayden Daniels for 2 seasons, but there was a time prior to this past year where Nussmeier was making a case to potentially offset or take Daniel's starting gig in that LSU Tigers offense. He came in relief for some games and just really ignited the offense. He's a great downfield passer. Played the bowl game, but overall just hasn't had a lot of starting experience, but still someone that I think has a lot of hype and potential to possibly be a draft prospect. So what were your thoughts on him during your evaluation?
Yeah, again, not a lot of reps, just kind of the nature of being a backup. I was pretty intrigued with him as well. He's a little bit thin. I'd like to see him put on some weight if possible, but he's got a pretty good arm. He can throw the deep ball real well. He can move around a bit. He's not like a rushing threat, but I thought he could move around a bit. And I was pretty impressed. He played the bowl game against Wisconsin last season when Jayden Daniels obviously opted out with him going to the draft. And I was pretty impressed. It's an LSU offense that has a lot of sort of overhaul in the passing game with Thomas and Neighbors off to the NFL, but they've got Kyron Lacey there still. They bring in CJ Daniels from Liberty, so they got some pieces still around. Mason Taylor at tight end. So he's in a pretty good spot. It's a pretty good offense. I think that, another good year, he could see a similar type of ascent of some of these other quarterbacks who kind of stepped in later and, played well when they got there. Yeah, I'm excited to see how he does. He's kind of had a lot of hype for a few years, like you mentioned. So it's cool to see him finally getting his chance. And I think that this LSU team could be really good if the defense gets better and Nussmeier is as advertised.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to backup quarterbacks, usually it's kind of who knows what's going to happen with these guys. But I feel like Nussmeier really has the hype and build in just like stock to where this is a legitimate like draft consideration type of guy where if he has a good year, people are going to be very much talking about him as a prospect and not necessarily kicking the can down the road and saying, oh, yeah, I want to see it for one more season. Obviously, a full season of play is going to be important for him, but when I watch him, I really like his footwork. I think he's a guy that really looks comfortable dropping back and making some throws. He's very confident and throws with nice anticipation when it comes to the downfield game. I want to see him kind of integrate the entire passing offense, and I do think that Mike Denbrock being gone from LSU is going to make that job tougher for him, but I liked what I saw. As far as just comfort and just confidence as a passer, I think he offers a lot of it, which I think is generally an overlapping issue for new quarterbacks where they kind of look frantic and they have those issues kind of processing the defense. And I'm not saying that he's necessarily shown great processing just yet, but he throws with very nice anticipation and he throws with confidence downfield consistently to where he's able to make those shots, but also kind of sprinkle in the underneath game. And I like his arm. I really do. I think he's got some nice velocity on it, but also it's just the ability to consistently place passes downfield where you're not just chucking it and you're consistently making plays where you're just throwing deep for the sake of throwing deep. He's throwing deep with nice positioning, nice placement, and making it to where the wide receiver has an excellent chance for downfield capability. So I really like what I saw on Nussmeier. I think he's someone that's very intriguing and someone that I'm going to keep an eye on this year. Probably one of the more like pathway type of QBs like we talked about with Taylen Green, where it could go a few different directions. But this is one of those that I think is the higher floor type of like high upside, unknown gambles in this quarterback batch for the SEC play.
Yeah, I also think, looking at Jayden Daniels, his improvement from 2022 to 2023, the big thing was that deep ball getting a lot better. And with Nussmeier, obviously it's just flashes, but you're already looking at a really good deep ball. So, if he can keep that going, I think that there's some opportunity for some real good production this year.
Yeah, and moving on though to Blake Shapen at Mississippi State, the former Baylor quarterback, came in for Jerry Buchanan, and It was an interesting situation because he came in for the Big 12 championship, won them the game, looked very promising, was the starter for the next year, replacing Bohannon and kind of getting him to transfer out of there. Didn't play as well as many kind of hoped, and there's been some issues in terms of just injuries and kind of just protection issues at Baylor that hurt him. But there is some nice flashes of good velocity in the short to intermediate game. He's got some nice mobility. 6'1", 210 pounds, so not necessarily the biggest guy, but he's very tough when it comes to taking on contact. I think he's very good at running with aggression and also just like staying in the pocket, being willing to make those throws while getting hit. But there's a little bit of give and take in that regard. He's a fifth-year senior, but I believe he has one more year of eligibility after the season if he were to return. Working with Jeff Lebby, one of the better offensive minds in college football, finally getting his first head coaching gig. So I'm interested to see what happens with Lebby here with Mississippi State and especially with Blake Shapen.
Yeah, I think I like what you said about his short and intermediate throws. I thought he does a really nice job on those. I think he does have some good zip there. I don't think he's quite there with the deep ball, which makes me a little bit nervous. I think he's like an okay athlete. I don't really love his game out of structure, and I think it's tricky to really buy in on a guy who's sort of smaller, doesn't really have this super creative aspect to his game like a Bryce Young, for example, and doesn't have this like, out of this world arm or really good arm like a Carson Beck. I just feel like you kind of don't really have it. He doesn't really have a defining sort of part of his game. And I think that's going to sort of pull him back as far as his draft prospects go. But I think, he's a good, solid college quarterback. I think he's in line for possibly a good year. Obviously, being on one of the, I guess, lesser talented teams in the SEC is never an easy task, though. But I think he's probably more like a priority free agent type of guy for me, just because I don't think he has that one thing that's really going to appeal to teams or make teams think that this is a guy that I want to take a shot on with a draft pick.
Yeah, and for comparisons are tough to kind of make for some of these guys, but I think the biggest one that stood out for me with Shapen was probably Mackenzie Milton prior to that injury, where you see it in that short to intermediate game with his mobility. Mackenzie Milton obviously probably wasn't the prospect that people wanted to hype him up as, even pre-injury, but he was a very exciting quarterback at UCF that worked with Levy and led them to that undefeated season. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's similar in terms of usage. I don't think they're going to go undefeated at Mississippi State with SEC play, but I think it's going to be a similar type of offense, trying to operate on similar style and similar schemes that helped Mackenzie Milton succeed and help that UCF offense kind of find their groove. But I'm interested to see what happens with Shapen. I really liked him coming out of his breakout campaign in that Big 12 championship, where I thought he was maybe going to kind of take that next step and maybe be a breakout candidate at the quarterback picture. I've kind of cooled down on him a lot since then because I haven't seen it yet, but there are flashes in that short to intermediate game to where I think he can be a good quarterback at the college level. I'm not sure about his NFL draft upside right now, unless that deep ball kind of develops further and he becomes more efficient as a downfield passer. But it's not without saying that there is potential because he's a baseball guy. We see some really nice malleability in his arm to where he's making some off angle throws and making some throws where you're saying, wow, that's an NFL caliber toss right there. But we need to see it in that deep game to where there's not these limitations for him as a passer, because that's where you start to have issues as a prospect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on from Shapen to Brady Cook at Missouri, an interesting situation because we've seen quarterbacks kind of have that complementary piece at wideout that helps them kind of make that jump to being an elite level quarterback. Mac Jones had Devonta Smith, Joe Burrow had Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, Kenny Pickett even had Jordan Addison, and there's probably no better receiver to have if you're a quarterback than Luther Burden, a guy that you can easily just kind of throw to behind the line of scrimmage, and he'll get you those 15, 20 yards. But also he's a guy that can make plays downfield as well. So Brady Cook is an interesting passer. He has some nice velocity, 6'2", 205 pounds. Fifth-year senior, but he does have that extra year of eligibility, similar to how Shapen did. But, what were your thoughts on Cook and your watching, and where do you view him as a prospect?
Yeah, I thought he had a really nice year last year. Missouri was kind of this team that burst onto the scene a bit. They had a great record, played Georgia real close. I thought they were really good, especially on offense. And Cook's coming back. Their top two pass catchers in Burden, like you mentioned, and Theo Weiss are both coming back as well. I think he's in store for another big year here. And if he does another big year, I think this is a guy who probably ends up getting drafted. I don't know if he has really an elite arm, but like you said, it's not bad. And I really like his ball placement. I think, Bird's obviously incredible after the catch, but I do think Cook does a nice job of setting up his receivers to, kind of keep going and making plays after the catch and, throwing them on the run. I think, he's a good athlete himself as well. He can escape the pocket and can run a little bit. I don't think, he's got an elite arm. I don't think, he's an elite runner. I think for those reasons, he's probably sort of stuck in like the day 3 range. But I think a good year can definitely get him drafted. I think it'll be interesting to see, how he does and if he can take some sort of step, because if he can, then maybe there's some conversation to be had, but I'm not sure, how much more there is for him to improve on, I guess, based on what we saw last year.
Yeah, he's kind of similar to Mertz, where I really like his play and I think he's dependable, but there is kind of that question of how much upside he has. For Cook, I really like his urgency without looking frantic in the process. He's someone that can kind of operate on the move, roll out, and make some nice throws. He makes some great passes, both for Weiss and Burden, and I think it really benefits him to have such high quality weapons surrounding him. Missouri, they had a great defense last year, and that was a lot of who they relied on to kind of be the leaders and the focal point of their team success. But can an offensive centric type of roster now kind of help them continue that success into a second year of great play in the SEC? That's going to be what's interesting to watch. Obviously, we know that Brady Cook's going to be good. Luther Burden's going to be good. Theo Weiss is going to be good. But, can it be enough to help Missouri win those tight games against some very tough SEC opponents? When I was watching him, though, I really thought that he has some nice throws when on the move. And I think that's what most impressed me about him. I think being able to improvise like that is what's going to help him kind of succeed, especially when playing against some of those very tough defensive lines in the SEC. But the question for me, like you kind of had as well, is just what overall upside does he have to where he can kind of take those next steps? Is he going to be someone that kind of just checks the boxes of being like a game manager and, safe type of QB rather than that pro level quarterback? Because game manager at college level can sometimes result in not being good enough for the NFL. So what is he going to do to kind of elevate this offense? What is he going to make happen for this team on the field that isn't just relying on the skill sets of Burden and Weiss and some of the other weapons that are in that Tigers offense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to Ole Miss, and we got Jaxson Dart, a quarterback that I've seen tossed around as a potential first-round guy a lot of time. I'm not as high on him as most. I think this is his last year of eligibility, but it is his 4th year as a starter, 4th-year senior. So there's potential that he could have another year with COVID going around. I'm not sure what the eligibility rules are for every single one of these guys. Sometimes it varies by player, but 4th year, 6'2", 220 guy, nice arm talent. I think there are some nice throws, but I do think it's not to the level that makes him this extremely exciting quarterback. I think it's just solid enough. I think similar to kind of Cook, where it's like he's got some nice mobility. He's got a solid arm, but I don't see the traits that kind of make him this high-level QB, and I don't see the efficiency from play to play where I feel like he's the guy that's kind of carrying this offense. In this Lane Kiffin type of scheme, I do think that the quarterback has definitely benefited from the RPOs and the overall just kind of play calling that he kind of integrates. So maybe part of that is me just kind of discrediting what he needs credit for. But I think we saw a similar type of situation with Matt Corral where, he had a lot of hype as a prospect, but we saw the NFL not necessarily as high on him, and especially with that lack of tool that kind of set him apart from the pack and that lack of elite ability in the play that I just haven't seen from Dart, but I want to see it this season, especially with Judkins out of town and now him kind of becoming the leader of the offense.
Yeah, I think regarding eligibility, I think this is his last year because, he was starting as a true freshman at USC. Similar to McCord, who he never started, but I think he never played 4 or less games. So they're both 4th years who are in their last year of eligibility. I think I like Dart a little more than you. I was pretty happy with his arm. It's not like an elite, Josh Allen type of guy, but I think he's got a good arm and can make any throw. I agree that his consistency isn't there on a play-to-play basis. I think he needs to be more efficient overall. Kind of forces a lot of things. Just like on a play-to-play basis. And I think that's something he needs to improve. I think this is a big year for him. People are pretty divided. I think people are either in or they're out right now. There's not a lot of people who are kind of like, I guess you are, but I feel like the general consensus, people like really like him or they really don't. But, Ole Miss, they bring back Trey Harris, who was the best pass catcher last year. They have this monster portal class, best in the country. Expanded playoff format. This is a team that's looking to make the playoffs and maybe even win a game or two within the playoffs. And a lot of that is going to lie on Jaxson Dart's shoulder. The key point of the offense last year, Dart was playing well, but the key point was Quinshon Judkins, and he's off at Ohio State now. So they replaced him. They brought in Logan Diggs. They kept Ulysses Bentley, but I think this offense is really going to bank on Dart taking a step as a passer and really turning this into elite offense. And if they can do that, then I think his stock could jump into the first round range. But that's going to take a serious improvement. I think he needs to be smarter as a passer. He needs to stop forcing things, needs to anticipate the field better, throw receivers open a little bit better. But I think if he can do those things, then his athleticism and arm talent and ability to kind of move off platform and make plays off platform really give him a high ceiling as a quarterback prospect. So he's one of the ones I'm more interested to see kind of what happens. Not as a guy who can break onto the scene because I think he's sort of arrived already, but if he can take that next step and really become a top prospect in this class.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because he didn't really mince his words when it came to Quinshon Judkins. He posted the Instagram story that was about, hey, you got to put the team first, and he made it very evident that he didn't feel that Judkins said that. So when you're kind of calling out some high level, very highly touted players, you have to kind of prove, hey, I'm capable of filling that gap and being that leader for this team. And if he's willing to talk that game, he has to play that game. So I'm interested to see what happens. I kind of like the ferocious attitude. I think that kind of energy and fire is good to have, but you have to back it up or else it can easily kind of backfire on you. We saw Tate Martell tell Justin Fields not to miss twice, and that didn't really work out for him. So sometimes talking trash just doesn't benefit you. But for Jaxson Dart, he is an established starter. I think he's a very good college quarterback. It's just now trying to elevate from being just a good college quarterback to a very good NFL draft prospect on top of that. So we'll see what happens for Ole Miss. I agree with you that is a playoff aspiring team. The transfer portal class that they brought in is going to be very exciting. There's some great pieces that we're going to be talking about with each podcast episode that we do about the positions coming up in this preseason. I'm excited to see what happens with Ole Miss, and Jaxson Dart's going to play a big part in that. Another team that is relying on their quarterback to kind of be the leader of this offense, Texas Longhorns. Quinn Ewers completely lost all of his weapons. Jonathan Brooks, gone. Jatavian Sanders, gone. Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, gone. This is going to be a team, and Jordan Whittington, gone. This is going to be a team that is just replacing the entire weapons room, but bringing back the quarterback. Quinn Ewers, a guy that is talked about as a potential first-round prospect. We'll see what happens. There's been some inconsistencies in play on the film, but there is talent as well. Let's go ahead and have you start out. What are your thoughts on Ewers so far in your evaluation?
Yeah, I really liked him. Maybe even more than Beck, honestly. I think, he's just super highly touted recruit, and the expectations went sky high. He maybe hasn't quite met them, but I thought he was really good last year and led this Texas team to the playoffs. And I think a lot of it was kind of on his shoulders. I think, that Alabama game was just really incredible from him. And kind of like Beck, not the most difficult situation. The line's pretty good. Jonathan Brooks, until he got hurt, was awesome. Mitchell, Worthy, Whittington, Sanders, great quadruple set of weapons there. So he had a lot around him, but I thought he did well. And the arm is really good. I think people are a little bit mixed on it. I think it's just kind of how he throws. He doesn't really zip the ball as much as he should, but he can make any throw on the field and does so consistently. He dropped some weight last year, and I think that was good in that it helped him be a little bit more mobile, which I think was really noticeable on tape. He put some of that weight back on this offseason. I think it was good weight from what I've seen, which I think will help him, one, be a little healthier, because that's definitely been a problem over his 2 years starting, and two, just sort of, have a bit more muscle on him. I think there's some mechanical things with the release that need to be worked on. And I think, as I mentioned, he needs to zip the ball a bit more and kind of be a threat to hit these tight window passes that he sort of hasn't really done at this stage. But I think the upside here is sky high. And I think as of now, he would probably be my favorite to end up the quarterback one in this class. I think Beck's a little bit safer, but I think there's just so much to be excited about with Ewers. And if he can have a good year with this new group of weapons, then I think he'll be at least one of the first 2 or 3 quarterbacks selected.
Yeah, he's one of those exciting offseason prospects because there is a lot that you want to see in that next step for his game. But I do think the growth that he showed in this past season was very impressive. You know, a lot of processing and downfield touch has been shown in this second year as a starter for Texas. Now I want to see him continue to make those leaps. You talked about it a lot. His arm, it's very weird. There is a lot of mixed opinions, but I think the arm talent is undeniable because he's a trajectory thrower rather than a guy that's just throwing with a lot of velocity when it comes downfield.
Yeah.
But that trajectory, I mean, he's putting up like punts for his throws when it's that type of hang time. And it's almost impressive because most QBs aren't really capable of doing that or aren't doing that routinely to where what Ewers is doing, yes, there's questions about can he consistently make velocity type throws where he's hemming the ball into tight windows. But when he's operating as a downfield passer, he makes some really high throws that I think can be transferred into, okay, less arc on it. Now let's put some zip on it. And I think that's something that's just going to come with mechanics and experience and working with NFL coaches that I think maybe doesn't happen at the college level just because a lot of teams, when they have the success and production that they already have out of a guy, they aren't as focused about trying to help him elevate those mechanical issues as much as they are just trying to get him comfortable with the new weapons that are coming in and helping him learn the offense even more. So I'm expecting a lot of the mechanical issues to remain in this season. Obviously, the hope is that his footwork's going to be better and he's going to be more comfortable and confident in the pocket. But I do expect a lot of the throwing issues to kind of maintain into the season where maybe the release is still a little long and some of his throws kind of go a little high as he works with the shoulders. But I do like what he's working with in that Sarkisian offense. I think he took a tremendous second-year step that will encourage me to be in on him for taking that third-year leap. I think the malleability in his arm to throw off angle is very impressive. He makes some throws where his body's working completely opposite of what his handedness is, and he's able to kind of whip his arm almost like 45-degree angle the other way and just make a nice throw across the middle where it's like most guys aren't making that toss. And I know that there's throws that you can kind of make those instances of and say, look, you know, other QBs can do it, but Ewers does it consistently to where I like what I see in that regard. The mobility was also impressive, you know, especially early in the season. We saw him running around a lot, helping him get that confidence built up. I think this year now he is the centerpiece of this offense. He's the sole leader of what's going to happen for this team. Expectations are high for Texas. You know, just because they're moving to the SEC doesn't mean that the Longhorns aren't expecting to be in the postseason. Like you mentioned, though, this is going to be a very crowded SEC field. Ole Miss is expected to be in. Georgia's expected to be in. Alabama's expected to be in. Even teams like LSU are thinking that they have a shot at making it into this field. Texas is going to have a tough path, especially with out of conference game like Michigan. So we're going to see what happens, but it's going to fall on Ewers. And if Texas prevails, I mean, that's going to be a very strong sign of encouragement for what he can be in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how they stack up with Bama and Georgia this year, with how much turnover there was in their offense. I think, like, you know, they've replaced their weapons. They got Isaiah Bond from Bama, Matthew Golden, CJ Baxter was really good as a true freshman last year. So I think he'll step in and kind of replace Brooks pretty seamlessly. And then they've got a couple of young guys as well who can probably step up at receiver. But, you know, even so, you know, it's new chemistry. You got to develop all these guys. So it'll be super interesting to see if they can keep it going on offense. I'm pretty excited to see them go.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what they do. But moving over in the same state, Texas A&M, Connor Weigman, the guy that I think a lot of people are talking about as a potential riser at the quarterback position. I don't know if it necessarily counts as a riser whenever you have so much vocal support, but still a guy that I think has a lot of potential. I think when I watch this guy, I see a lot of similarities to the Tua Tagovailoa type mold, where you're kind of counting on the mental aspect and accuracy and anticipation more so than you are on the natural tools of arm strength and, you know, the ability to create plays for himself and send the ball 60 yards downfield. Not that Tagovailoa isn't making some deep plays with Tyreek Hill in Miami now, but I think the key part of his game is having those keen sense of finding the windows and making those passes with great anticipation to where you're delivering with efficiency. And that's what Weigman's game is kind of built off of. Texas A&M obviously bringing in Mike Elko as his head coach. New era in the offense. I'm intrigued to see what happens with it. I think that it's going to be a situation where, you know, this team is going to rely on the defensive strength that they have, but Weigman's going to be a big part of this offense, despite being a third-year QB that maybe doesn't have a lot of experience due to the injuries he suffered.
Yeah, I struggle to call, you know, a third-year five-star recruit a riser. I think the hype's been there really since, you know, high school. Yeah, I think a full season, kind of like you were, the full season's needed. His freshman year, he didn't start till like halfway through the year, and then last year he got hurt. I agree. I'm not really there with his arm. But I think that the accuracy and anticipation is there. I think the one thing that Tua does really well that Weigman isn't really there yet is Tua is really good at manipulating linebackers with his eyes. I think Weigman still kind of stares down his reads a little bit. So if he can get better there, I think there's some serious room for growth. Is just kind of in the short and intermediate passing game. I think like Ewers, maybe to an extent, he does a nice job of throwing in different angles with his arm. Even if he's not like the most creative, like out of the pocket type of guy, he can kind of step in and move his arm around and avoid pressure that way. I wasn't, as high as maybe some people are on him, but I think he's so young that there's like a clear step he can take to being another good prospect in this class. I think I agree that he's sort of in this Tua mold where, he's not going to be a physically imposing type of quarterback like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes, but he can make the throws and he can make them accurately. And I think that with sort of the like kind of similar to how I mentioned with back, the rise of these offensive of coaches who can sort of create separation and get guys open, and the quarterback's got to make the read and make the throw. I think that he'll find a starting job, either it be this year or next year, wherever he ends up getting picked.
Yeah, and I'm really intrigued to see what happens with his future at Texas A&M. Obviously, Elko's going to come in and try to establish his own culture there, but could it potentially result in a situation where Weigman maybe has a solid year, but then wants to transfer and try to find a more established offense, maybe a situation like Oregon? So it wouldn't shock me if he's kind of one of those guys that has a solid year, decides to return, and then ends up entering the portal or a situation similar and tries to find an offensive system and passing attack where he can kind of build on his strengths better, and working with like a guy like Will Stein, or maybe even going to like Ole Miss with Kiffin or DeBauer at Alabama, and being that kind of long-term piece. We'll see what happens with some of those situations, especially like Ty Simpson at Alabama is the expected protege after Milroe's done. But I think it's an interesting situation to monitor, and I think there's a lot of different directions where it could be Weigman's not there next year in both ways, whether it's transfer or entering the draft. But at the same time, I'm excited to see him with a full season of play. I like the mental game. I think there's a lot that still needs to be developed in terms of arm strength and just overall flash in his play, but he's a very good college quarterback, and I'm excited to see this Aggies offense with that dependability behind center, especially last year. They went through all these injuries at QB, and it was really tough luck for Jimbo in a year that was make or break for him, but it unfortunately played out the way it did, and now Elko's going to have to try to right the ship and help take advantage of the situation that the Aggies have.
Yeah, I think the transfer idea is interesting because I think, this is going to team that's going to have a good defense. They were great last year. Elk was a defensive guy, former coordinator at A&M. They're going to have a great defense. Their running back room is young, but they're pretty good. They all looked pretty good last year. I don't think they really lost anyone there. And they lose Evan Stewart in the receiving room. They've got a couple guys, but I think they're going to kind of lean on their defensive identity and sort of be a more run-heavy team. So I could definitely see Weigman sort of having a nice year, but maybe wanting to go somewhere where we can showcase the talent a little more in year 4. But yeah, they're another team that I could sneakily see being, up there playoff wise if everything goes right. They've got a super talented defense, like I said, and Weigman's played well anytime he's been on the field. So if he can stay on the field, they could win 9 or 10 games. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing for Texas A&M is the talent's always been there. So it's about finding the coach that can kind of take advantage of that. That was a big thing for Sarkisian coming into Texas was, we need a coach that is able to take advantage of our resources, make the most of this new era that we're entering into in college football, and, establish a team that kind of builds a better program and more steady success. We'll see if Texas is able to consistently kind of have that, but that's the same path that A&M's kind of looking at, saying, look, these seasons where we're going 500, that's not acceptable for the amount of funding we're putting into the program, the amount of access we have to landing top talent because of the funding we put in. And now it's about kind of establishing that baseline, probably with younger recruits and trying to get those young talent pieces in, and then eventually kind of furthering yourself with those portal acquisitions. And I think they're on the right track. I do like Elko. I think what he did at Duke was sort of underrated, especially with the way that he was able to kind of make the most of like an offensive line situation where they were able to get guys like Monk and Barton in those trenches. So I'm excited to see what happens for Texas A&M. But right now, this year especially, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, especially with Weigman under center. For our last guy in the SEC, Diego Pavia, quarterback for Vanderbilt, a guy that is coming from New Mexico State, 6 foot, 200 pounds, fifth-year senior, so out of eligibility. It's an intriguing ad. I mean, this is a guy that was very good for New Mexico State, helped Jerry Kill and the Aggies kind of rise up in the Conference USA despite low expectations. They had a very good year. I'm not sure if Pavia's game translates right now to the SEC. A lot of his play at New Mexico State kind of seemed like if I were playing like a college football video game where I'm consistently rolling out, kind of making some plays, and I'm just kind of dumping off or running consistently. And I think there's going to be a lot more limitations to that availability for those plays and splash moments at the SEC level, especially with a program like Vanderbilt where they're generally outmatched in the trenches and it results in some ugly games. But I mean, it's worked so far for Pavia, so I'm interested to see if he can kind of build on that success and maybe continue it at the next level in this Power 5 play. But jumping from a G5 offense where maybe you're run heavy and working on sort of roll out passes consistently to trying to make that jump to the SEC where you're kind of outmatched by a lot of your opponents, it's going to be tough on Pavia.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was interesting that, Arkansas and Vanderbilt, who are two of the sort of maybe less talented squads in the SEC right now, Vanderbilt more so, obviously, went with group of 5 quarterbacks, rather than someone maybe established at a higher level. But he's an interesting guy, like you said, he can run a lot, he can run well. And I think that sort of ability can win them a couple games, if it translates well enough, which I think it will to an extent. I think, he's sort of undersized. Mechanically, there's some stuff I have issue with. I think his dropback's a little bit inefficient, which when you're going against SEC pass rushes, you need to be optimizing that and, getting the ball out quick. I think, he put the ball in danger a bit more than maybe the competition punished him for last year, which won't be the case when you're playing an SEC schedule. So I think he needs to kind of develop more as a passer to really do anything with this Vanderbilt team. And I'm not sure that it's the best environment for that, just with the talent deficiency he's going to be playing at. And I think just kind of that sort of mold he's in is more built to being a college quarterback than is an NFL quarterback. So I'd be pretty surprised if he's ever a guy who merits serious discussion unless he takes a large jump as a passer, which I guess is possible. But I think at Vanderbilt, I'd probably be pretty surprised if we saw that.
Yeah, we need to see him develop some good habits when it comes to just sticking in the pocket, staying in there and making throws, letting the play process and making some reads over the middle of the field. Right now, that's not in his game, and we haven't seen it so far. Not to say it won't happen, not to say it can't happen. It's just something that is definitely kind of developmental and something that right now hasn't been flashed. It's still intriguing, and I like what I saw at New Mexico State, to where I think he can be a good college quarterback in the right system. It's just similar to you. I don't know if Vanderbilt's going to be that, but ultimately, as an NFL prospect, I'm not entirely bought in unless I see those flashes continue at the SEC level.
Yep.
Well, that is all for the SEC quarterback review. We are going to get started this week of our positional reviews, and we're going to go by conference here for quarterback. Then we're going to start to jump to the positions, running backs, receivers, tight ends, all that and more. Stick around this week. Tomorrow we got ACC. So we look forward to seeing you. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, comment, anything you can do to share this video. We would appreciate it. I'm Michael Rochman. That's Jack Donovan. And that's the 2-minute drill.